Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. My guest today is Tim Else, and he runs a business called What Else Events, which is all around events management, best known for running Safety, Health and Wellbeing Live. And there are two of these trade shows coming up this year, one in Manchester in May and the other in Farnborough in September. Tim and I chat about the importance of trade shows and the importance of connection, particularly in this market, which he specialises in, of operational safety and health, as well as bringing in the well-being aspect, which we touch upon as well. We talk a bit about the programme, some of the speakers, and who's going to be there in Manchester as well, and really kind of what the big themes are that this conference will seek to address to make it a valuable and worthwhile experience for you to attend. Hope you enjoy the chat with Tim. And as we say at the end, we're planning for me to be there in Manchester to do some kind of live podcasting and video shooting and things like that. So if you are going to attend, drop me a line, LinkedIn or drop me an email or something. Address is charris@slipsafety.co.uk. Let me know, and it'd be great to connect and meet up in person. With that then, let's get into the conversation with myself and Tim. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Hi, good morning, Christian. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Looking forward to having a chat with you today and catching up face to face at the show in Manchester next month.
Yeah, well, that'll be the first time we've met in person, and I think there's a lot of conversations like this one going on at the moment.
Yes.
People meet for the first time having met virtually, but I've been admiring what you're doing with the podcast and the business for some time, and you've built quite a following, Christian.
Well, I don't know about that, but there's a few people listening. They must have nothing better to do.
Well, I think that people are really influential in the world of occupational safety and health, and people who are involved with my shows. That's where the crossover came, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And meeting face to face for the first time, I guess, is one of the drivers or one of the answers you're going to give to this question, which is why are trade shows like the ones you organise so important?
Well, they always have been, right? The basic structure of a trade show, buyer meets seller, we're talking hundreds of years that this format hasn't really changed. Trade shows have survived multiple pandemics, and there's a really obvious reason for that we as human beings in the last 2 years, and this is my view, okay, in the last 2 years, we've had to retreat to our caves and wait out the storm. What we haven't done is evolved, changed in any really significant way. So what we need as people, the connection that we need, that hasn't changed one iota. We've had to adapt for sure. And not everything that's come out of the pandemic, by the way, in this respect is bad. Look at what we're doing now. We don't need to drive hundreds of miles to see each other to do this. But literally nothing replaces the value of connection, whether that's physically shaking a hand, being in the same space as somebody else. We'll get to know each other on a Zoom call, we'll talk on the phone, but actually the connection we make when we're both together at the Manchester Central show on the 23rd and 24th of May will be different than the one we make now in an hour of chatting on Zoom. So, those things are fundamental to our well-being as people, right? You can't cope with being in isolation. We all know this. And trade shows, there's just nothing that replaces them. And I've been fascinated to see my industry, if you like, if we assume that safety is your industry and trade shows are mine, been fascinating to see, let's not beat around the bush, for a trade show organizer, the last 2 years have been extremely difficult. Our industry laid off 40% on average its staff. and then has built back. And there were plenty of people, and I wouldn't include myself in this, but there were plenty of people who did just wonder for a moment whether the trade show couldn't or wouldn't return as a platform. That never occurred to me. I never thought that would happen. But we saw this huge growth in the idea of virtual events. My personal opinion is that's an oxymoron, doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
What we did see was a rise in really good quality digital platforms. But my view is that digital is digital, and it has its place, and it's a really important place, has a really important place in the marketing for my shows and my business. But it's not a replacement for a trade show, and neither is a virtual event. But what's been amazing, is our ability to adapt. So, I've seen awards events that I launched years ago, they were forced to go virtual.
Yeah.
The organisers of those have done an absolutely fantastic job, but everybody would admit that the experience of being, let's imagine the world of occupational safety and health, and you being rewarded, awarded, recognised for excellence. Well, it's not quite the same doing that sitting in your office.
A friend of mine is a makeup artist, and she won a BAFTA. But it was at a virtual BAFTA award. So, whilst she was obviously over the moon, she worked on Peaky Blinders, and that's what she won a BAFTA for. So she was over the moon, but obviously, it wasn't the same.
No, and it just isn't. So look, my feeling on this is that nothing replaces a trade show. What we've seen since trade shows were able to recommence is a gradual build back. And don't get me wrong, I call it as I see it. It's going to take a little while yet. I run trade shows for a living. They are not back to full speed yet. But I think, in fairness, most exhibitors, customers have been very pleasantly surprised by the return that trade shows have made. And perhaps they've also come to value them in a way that, or it's reminded them of the great value that they offer. And one of the really big benefits, I think, to the exhibitions industry of the pandemic is it might just cap this nonsensical rush to claim more visitors than you've ever had before, and more visitors than anybody else has ever had. Look, let's be honest, it doesn't matter whether you're buying a small 6-meter shell scheme booth and putting 2 staff on it, or buying a 50 square meter stand and putting 40 staff on it. There is a significant limit to the number of engagements you can have. So whether that trade show brought 2,000, 3,000, 10,000 people is not the relevant point. What's relevant is, did you meet the right people? Did you engage in a way that moved your business forward? And were you able to develop your sales pipelines from it? And I think a lot of people have remembered that actually trade shows are a completely unique way of doing that. And actually, the truth is they weren't able to replace that lead generation during the pandemic. There were lots of things that people did. And, marketeers are, by their nature, resilient, strong, lateral thinkers. The vast majority of them are really creative thinkers. But the truth is they were treading water for 2 years. And you've seen a lot of people come back to trade shows perhaps in a different way. And I would advocate that, it is very easy to spend far too much money on a trade show. And I think plenty of CFOs out there will be telling their teams that now, not that having not been able to do trade shows, that they'll stop doing them, but that actually they'll do them in a more sensible, pragmatic, modest manner. And that is one of many reasons why I'm back into the market for regional, sensibly sized trade shows, because you've got to be able to prove a return on investment to the satisfaction of your board. And sometimes that's very challenging with very large scale trade shows. I think I'd admit that. I think most people would admit that.
Makes good sense to me. And I can see a strong parallel between, so for example, I know we're going to talk about IOSH a bit later, but I've done a number of talks at IOSH events, and you can have, 20 people in the room face to face, and you just feed off the energy of the room, and you can sort of you just know that those people are much more engaged and they're getting more from it, and you're getting more from it delivering a talk as well. Whereas yes, you can have 200, as we regularly do for those kinds of things, virtually, but it's so hard because you can't, there's just that, there isn't that connection, which is the word you used, and
Yeah,
so
look,
yeah, there's more people, but are they getting the same from it?
you can measure digital engagement. There's lots of tools for doing it. Some of those tools have become significantly better recently. However, what you can't do is compete with the idea. Once you have said, I'm going to travel short distance, so let's say we're going to come to Manchester Central for SHW Live. You've committed to come, you've spared the time, you've talked to your colleagues, you're not going to be at the ranch, at the factory, at the site that day, and you are free. You don't need to concentrate on anything else. You've made the commitment, you walk in the door, and you've got time, you've created time, which is something we all struggle to do. But once you've registered for a trade show, you've put the badge around your neck on that lanyard and you've walked in, that time is golden. You've made that time for you and to develop your knowledge, which in turn will do great things for your business or for your employer. And you've got that time, and all sorts of things then start to happen. Taking your point, your engagement with what you're listening to, watching, and who you're meeting is absolute. You're immersed in it because there's no distraction.
Yeah, you're present.
You're present. That's exactly right. But also, and this is the interesting bit, and it's what everybody I think has been reminded of in the power of trade shows, is that connections happen, conversations happen that you hadn't planned. We all make a plan when we go to a trade show. This is my list of people I'm going to see. These are the sessions I'm going to sit in on. But actually what happens is that you make connections, you get introduced to people, you see things that you didn't know you needed, and you are reminded of things that, because you're in the moment, because you're present, you're looking around and thinking, okay, I've made my plan, I've seen that plan through, but there's so much more I could be doing. And you get back in the car or back on the train afterwards, and you think, wow, I didn't know I was going to get that and that out of that show. And with a digital event, a virtual event, the value they have is limited, but they don't give you that serendipitous, unexpected benefit that a trade show will give you. And that's the human connection. So, and that's irreplaceable. I don't see a parallel. I don't see any other way of doing that.
No. So turning specifically to your events then, and thinking about Manchester first, you've gone for a sort of tripartite theme of safety, health, and well-being. Do you want to talk to us about why you've had that triple focus?
Sure. As I said earlier, I've been doing shows of this type for the best part of 20 years. What I've seen in that time is I've seen the job titles of delegates and visitors morph and change. So in the early days, we would have health and safety managers coming through the door. Then we would have HSE, HSEQ, SHEC. You'd see the job titles change to include environment and quality. That's still completely relevant. But what I've seen in the last, and this was not true 10 years ago at all, because I did a piece of research on it and it didn't come out as relevant. But in the last 4 or 5 years, and this has been exacerbated by COVID and by the pandemic in a good way, is I've seen those actual job titles change to include the word well-being. So, and the other change that I've seen is board level positions, C-suite positions. And that's been where safety has struggled for a long time. To get representation and understanding in the boardroom has been, 10 years ago, almost impossible. Now, not so much. That relationship between the HR function, the safety function, that in a lot of big blue chip businesses, particularly manufacturing, construction, public sector, that's where the magic's happening. That's where people have started to realize at a corporate level the real tangible value of holistic well-being. And instead of just thinking about what causes absenteeism, cuts, scrapes, slips, falls, trips, we know the facts, we know the statistics. The HSE produce them every year and they're startling every year. But occupational, ill health, long latency disease, those are huge issues that we are dealing far more with, and my shows deal with that. But this piece around, and two separate issues really, around good mental health and around overall holistic well-being, the baggage that people bring to work, those are the things, whether it's financial, marital, health, in terms of what's going on, not ill health caused by your work necessarily, but other issues. These things prevent people from focusing, and they negatively impact their ability and their willingness to do their job. There is also, as we can all see, really a link between what is causing you to be unfocused and distracted and stressed, and accidents. There's an obvious link there. And I think big corporates have seen this and known this for some time. But the tangible differences are two: the change in job title, so that the safety professional is now being and has recently been asked to take on the responsibility for managing the wider piece. Now, that's a huge challenge. And there are plenty who are stepping up to the challenge and doing it really, really well with the full support of their board. And I think it would be fair to say there are others who know they have to do more. Some really don't know where to start, and SHW Live is there to look after those people. Others have started on this journey and have made great strides, but need to be inspired, are looking for help in terms of doing it much better. So that's why, as you put it, that tripartite offer. So I used to run trade shows that were about physical safety and occupational health. Now I run trade shows that talk to the same audience, but empower them and enable them to cope and manage with the piece around mental health and overall holistic well-being in a way that they weren't asked to 10 years ago, and that some are struggling with now. And by bringing people together in this type of environment, you get that peer-to-peer transaction between those who have mapped this out and worked out what the model looks like and all the best things to do, and those that are looking for that inspiration. And again, as you were saying earlier, that's very difficult virtually. It's difficult via the internet, and it's completely doable peer-to-peer.
Yeah. And I think it's always important to meet people where they're at as well, right? So if you tried to put this show on 15 years ago, it probably wouldn't have worked, because that wasn't the mindset that people were in. Whereas I think
you're right on one point. Trying to include the mental health and well-being piece and deliver that for safety professionals, no, that wouldn't have worked 15 years ago. It wasn't part of the remit.
No.
But delivering this where people live and work, well, that's a key point, right? And I've been delivering trade shows. I think I've delivered just short of 50 safety and health related trade shows of one type or another over my career. And unlike other sectors that I deliver trade shows for, and there's a really stark difference, it is very difficult to get, because the nature of a safety professional's job is very difficult for them to spend extended periods of time away from the site, from the factory, from the office. It is really challenging in a way that for other professionals it's much easier. And so what I found is that by delivering these things locally, regionally, and to a very high standard, you bring a very high quality audience, safety professionals representing very large scale employers, but you're effectively bringing this to their doorstep. And I've tried it with other sectors, hasn't really worked that well. With safety, there's something about the way in which you work and you're expected to work that makes this is just a really good fit between regional shows and safety professionals. So that's why the Northwest, right now, in the last few years, there've been more construction contracts awarded to the Northwest and Greater Manchester than anywhere else. The first time the percentage of construction contracts exceeded those in Greater London. So, and you can see that, right? You drive into Manchester, the skyline is full of cranes. In the latest HSE statistics also suggest there's been an uptick in accidents at work, a small uptick in serious illness and even death caused by work, and that's a worrying statistic. Whether it's directly related to the pandemic, I'm not sure, but that is also true for the Greater Manchester area, and that's why I've decided to start in Manchester. So first show is 23rd and 24th of May at Manchester Central, and then we bring a similar show with a very similar exhibitor base, but with a very targeted educational program to Farnborough, to cater for the south coast, home counties, M4 corridor, and London.
Makes good sense. Tell me a little bit about your advisory council, because that's it seems to me a very clever way of trying to put together a program.
Well, look, it's really simple. As I said to you just before we started this interview, I don't consider myself to be an expert in safety. I'm not. I have a real affinity with the marketplace, and I really enjoy it. And I've come to know a lot of people with significant influence and whose knowledge is far superior to mine. And so really this is more about running a trade show than it is about delivering for the safety market. By building a group, so I've called them an advisory council. There are 22 people sitting on that panel, on that board now, and they are made up of people who've run significant organizations in the safety field, previous CEOs of and presidents of IOSH, CEO of NEBOSH, current leaders, the current CEO of the British Safety Council, a whole group of people, you can see them on the website, but a whole group of people who are bedded in the market, who hold senior leadership roles. And the reason I've done it is to make sure that I separate the commerciality of running a trade show. It's funded by its exhibitors and sponsors, that's clear. And I separate that from the decision on what the educational content looks like. So it's keeping me honest, it keeps me focused, it makes sure, and this is the critical point with this, it makes sure that we focus all of the time on what the end user, the delegate, the safety and health professional actually needs and wants before anything else. And so this group of people that I have the good fortune to have known for a long time, who I consider to be friends and people who are leading the industry, they come together with me. I've outsourced, Neil Stone is the chair of our conference, is our conference chair. Neil spent, I think, the best part of 20 years in senior leadership roles at the Health and Safety Executive. And then I got to know him best over a sort of decade at the British Safety Council as a director of policy and communications. But Neil then will keep me honest and say, no, I think that's a poor piece of content. I think this is an excellent piece of content in a way that I simply can't. And he also knows all the people on the advisory council, and he's known them perhaps for 20, 25 years. So that works really well. It's a team of people who give a small amount of their time. I, in exchange, give them some exposure and some awareness and link them to the end user. That's great. That's a proper reciprocal partnership. But they're unpaid advisory counsellors who keep me on the straight and narrow and make sure we deliver a conference that is better than anything else you could hope for.
Which is needed, because I do think quite often, and I'm not saying this about safety conferences specifically, because I go to FM conferences and insurance conferences and all sorts of other sectors. But what you often find is that the program of speakers is basically who's got the biggest checkbook and is buying the biggest stand. And they get a speaker slot. And actually, you're often seeing, firstly, the same people again and again. Secondly, they're not really bringing many insights; they're just selling stuff, and so you don't get that much out of it.
Well, Christian, you're doing my job for me here. It's a pitfall that many exhibition organisers choose to jump into or fall into, which is an exchange of cash for speaking slots. I mean, that sounds a bit drastic, but that's what it is. We just don't do that with SHW Live.
I prefer when people pay me to speak. That's better. That's better exchange of cash for speaking.
It's a conversation we'll have another time. But when you look at this, I've got a bit more than a half-day conference being delivered specifically by the Health and Safety Executive. Senior leaders within HSE. So that level of connection, that's quite rare. And I've been really enthused and I've known the team at HSE for a long time. They are fantastic people. Their time has been limited. That's the reality of a government department, which is probably not funded as well as it ought to be. Soapbox moment. But they're making significant time to bring senior leaders out of HSE for the day to come and address the end user, actual connection. And I think I've seen this in the past, and safety professionals really value that exchange. So that's happening. We were talking just before we started as well. I've got a new partnership with one of my event partners now is IOSH. And Louise Hosking is coming as the president of IOSH in the middle of her tenure to address.
She'll be on the podcast in a couple of weeks as well.
Excellent, great. Well, and Louise is doing a fantastic job. I've got 2 past presidents of IOSH on my advisory council already. They tend to be people who are bedded in reality, actually practicing what they preach. It's a voluntary position, and I've met some amazing, influential, inspirational past presidents of IOSH. Louise seems to fit that mold well, but she's ploughing her own furrow. I've got an interview with her tomorrow myself. She's coming on your podcast, and my visitors will get to listen to Louise at the show on the 24th of May.
Great.
So the partnership with IOSH is really, really strong. The partnership with the British Safety Council, with the IIRSM, the International Institute of Risk and Safety Management, the Institute of Occupational Medicine. Too long a list to list in a podcast interview with you, Christian, but suffice it to say that outside of the Advisory Council, which is a group of individuals helping me, we then have a group of event partners with whom I have essentially a non-commercial relationship, where they bring great quality content, outstanding speakers, and advice and guidance, and they will make themselves available at the show for you, the end user, to come and talk to and engage with. NEBOSH is another example of being incredibly supportive and very knowledgeable, and have real influence in the sector. So by keeping the educational content truly independent, you as the end user deciding whether to register and come to Manchester in May, can be assured that
you're not just going to get sold to.
Well, your time's being exchanged for something really meaningful.
Of value.
The CPD value from the show is really starkly obvious. It's significant, and you won't be pitched to. That's not going to happen. Yeah.
So you've mentioned, Tim, the HSE stuff, which sounds fantastic. There's the partnership with IOSH. There's the trend we discussed around kind of the move towards a more holistic view around health and well-being. Are there any other kind of big themes or topics that you're going to have on the agenda, or you're having discussions about your advisory council about, or things that are kind of top of mind that you're going to try and
I think what you'll see, what I've tried to do, one thing I learned about running regional trade shows for this sector is that, and I've made mistakes here in the past, I freely admit that, but one of the mistakes I've made in the past is to take a conference program and build it once and then lift it and run it in various venues around the country. That doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is that what a safety professional in a key vertical industry in Manchester needs is not the same as a key industry vertical for the Southeast and London. There are similarities, of course, and so themes include advice and guidance on latest legislation, advice and guidance from lawyers on how to cope with the legal situation and whether you're being investigated. People need that practical advice. That doesn't really change too much, and so we have that at both shows. But with the Manchester show, we're really focused on some key industry verticals, on automotive, on food production, on aerospace, and trying to make sure that the panelists we have come out of those sectors. One area which is going to be very relevant and part of the content program for both shows is sort of road, rail, air, transport, just distribution and logistics. Enormous challenges in the world of safety within those environments. So that will be duplicated to a certain extent at both ends. But the panelists we have will be coming from industries within that geographic space. So that's one of the big differences over what I've done before. Of course, delivering a show in May this year, 2022, the first one, we've of course got to focus on a lot of advice and guidance around respiratory health. These are huge issues, whether we're looking at silica, whether we're looking at asbestos. And there's obviously great content around learnings as we come out of the pandemic, and also, best practice now in terms of how to cope with a resurgence of a pandemic.
Preparedness.
So of course, there's a focus on that. But there's also, we will also continue to focus on some of the perennials. We deal with working at height, the issues of falls from height. That's always in the program, of course. And those sort of perennial topics, we don't let those go by. We keep ramming home the message. but yeah, there's a sort of a twist towards the pandemic and respiratory health with this particular one, making sure we're relevant for an NHS clinical visitor, as well as industrial manufacturing, construction. 70% of my audience is coming from manufacturing, engineering, and construction environments. I make no bones about that. That's a very broad church, of course. I think something like 35 different SIC codes on there. But that will be slightly different profile in Manchester than it is in Farnborough, and we try to cater for that. So we'll put pen to paper on the conference program for the September show sometime in May and June, and that will come later. And it will, there'll be learnings from the May show. We'll keep some of the things that went down really well, but I will keep the space for those influential bodies like HSE, IOSH, British Safety Council, RRSM, Leverage. They will continue to influence the direction of the program.
Great. One of the things that you're doing for IOSH is sort of over and above, I suppose, the program of the conference, is you're doing some networking events and some breakfasts and things like that. Do you want to just tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have this in common. I think you delivered a presentation for a local IOSH regional branch just recently.
Yeah, I do quite a lot of IOSH branch and group events and stuff. So yeah, I'm always on the lookout. And many of the listeners I know are IOSH members. So
sure. Okay. So so a lot of, just to be clear, 50% of my audiences are always IOSH members. 50% are not, and they potentially will become, but 1 in 2. And so over the years, I've come to know branch chairs of regional IOSH branches quite well. I've been very well supported by them. This show is no different. So whilst we have central IOSH support for the show through Louise and through the HQ in Leicester, what we also have is a focus on partnering with the regional groups around the Manchester show. So we think about May. I was speaking just this week to the current chair of the Manchester branch of IOSH, a gentleman called Tom Beswick-Brown. Tom, again, another fantastic example of a consultant who's bedded in, spent his entire career working in occupational safety and health. So he lives it and breathes it and practices what he preaches. But branch committees are groups of volunteers. They're unpaid positions. And when we look at the effect the pandemic has had on that peer-to-peer networking, well, in terms of face-to-face, it has stopped it, almost entirely. And that's understandable, right? Those are the things, those are the connections haven't been happening. So Tom and I were talking about, and he's really passionate about how important it is to bring that back. And so we're doing a few really key things. So we have Louise delivering a keynote session on the Tuesday at the show. In the mornings of the show, we're running breakfast briefings for IOSH branch members and those interested in joining their local branch. So those are, a free breakfast, coffee, bacon sandwich, chance to sit down before the show opens in a relaxed environment and meet peer-to-peer with IOSH branch members. And if you aspire to be one, come and find out what that's all about. And then the other element to this, there will be various sort of committee meetings happening off the floor, and we're providing a platform for IOSH in that way. And then we're partnering specifically with IOSH on the evening of the first day of the show. Just as the show closes, we run a large-scale networking party where exhibitor comes together with visitor, but in a far more convivial, relaxed environment. Now, this year, for this particular show, we're doing that party in conjunction with IOSH and particularly with its branches. So lots of opportunity there, and working in partnership with them to deliver those things is something that I value very highly. But it's exactly the right thing to do when you consider that 1 in 2 of my visitors is already a paid up, committed member of the Institute.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thanks very much, Tim, for your time today. It's been great to talk about some of the trends that are happening both in your industry and in occupational safety and health. Where can people find out more? Where can they register to come along to the Manchester show and find about the programme and so on and so forth? Yeah,
fine. So the web address that you need is safetyhealthwellbeing.live. So www.safetyhealthwellbeing.live. And on there, you will find the full programme for the Manchester show and detailed speaker profiles. And all of this is free to attend, by the way.
Yeah.
You'll also find full details and profiles for all of our market-leading exhibitors, including our founding partners, some of the world's most significant manufacturers of PPE, RPE, safety equipment, training providers. They're all there, and you can find out about those. The registration form, obviously you need to be a qualifying visitor within reason, but I don't find that anybody registers for these shows without being.
I don't think if you were a I don't know, a software developer in making computer games, you'd probably be that interested, would you?
Absolutely. So the registration process is really easy. It takes a couple of minutes. You'll get sent a badge automatically. And then what happens is each week, as we build up to the show, my marketing team and I will write to you and inform you about what's happening, latest developments, key speakers. And the show is free to attend. The car parking is heavily discounted. But if you know the Manchester area, Manchester Central is very easy to get to.
It is, yeah.
Park and ride, whether you choose a tram, whether you choose the train, it's really easy. Yeah. And it's I would point out as well that the reason I've used lots of different venues for these types of shows, but I've chosen Manchester Central and Farnborough International because, in my view, they're best in class. They're award-winning smaller regional venues, but they are large scale, plenty of ventilation, lots of space, easily accessible, and they are very, very focused on the visitor experience for a trade show. It's what they do best, and the teams at Manchester and Farnborough are market leading in that respect. So they're far more expensive than other venues I've used over the years, but that doesn't matter. The reality is these are, the food is good, the catering's excellent, the accessibility is second to none, and it's an enjoyable day out then, as well as being a CPD experience or a procurement experience.
Definitely. Great. Well, thanks very much, Tim, for your time today. It's been great to connect and hear more about the show. Do register, go and visit the website. We'll put the website in the show notes as well.
Okay.
So do register, and look forward to seeing you there. I'll be there in Manchester doing a bit of
you're roving. Do some interviews and live podcasts, aren't you?
Yeah, a bit of roving reporting and trying to do some interviews, and we'll try and bash something together in terms of some good content. I'm
sure it'll be fantastic quality content. So when you come to the show, look out for Christian and go and talk to him and tell him what your experience was. And how you're getting on with the show. So we'll look forward to meeting in person, Christian.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, good stuff. All right.
Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Thank you very much, Tim. And thanks for joining us as well. And we'll see you again next week with another great interview. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.